Applying this, to the house of David Ireland as a place where he, as a person, was living. So do you feel there's a kind of, effort trying to distance yourself from his ghost?
Not consciously, rather I really let it happen to me, because when I was sleeping in his bed, it has a goosebump kind of a moment and feelings there, because there was a photograph of him above the bed. So I could not be affected by it, right? So all I could do really is to feel his presence with a benign intention. So and feel what I could do under the influence. Hopefully it's benign. So from that perspective, I really did see a lot of things in his bedroom only. For example, when I'm laying in bed, on the wall across from where I'm laying, there are two photographs. One is Joseph Beuys, one is Duchamp. So I all of a sudden see there is certain things about the lineage. Every artist, no matter how great they are influenced by something. And in that way, I really felt privileged and really excited that I'm allowed to be in direct relation to this kind of a heritage. And from there, my eyes went down, and then I noticed there's a bucket of dumbbells, his own work. Okay, prior to that, I had only seen his dumbbells as they are displayed as artwork, right? But now I was sleeping in his bed, right next to his bed, there's a bucket of them. I don't think the organizers really intended to show that as artwork. But all of a sudden, I was presented with this ambiguity that how do I come to terms, how do I reconcile with this otherwise artwork? But now all of a sudden, it's just one pile of them. Where is the line? So all of those very minute thoughts came to me, and I had to have a certain understanding of it. And that to me is really the relation that I had while I was there, dealing with quote unquote ghosts, and I really like it. It is really those moments that inspired me. It is, he didn't teach me anything. I was really learning stuff from it. It was great. Yeah.
So this is why it's interesting that eventually you come up with a much more figurative interpretation of this relation through the image of the roots. The tree roots.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
You have this very big photographies with 4 images of root that forms a room, basically.
Yes.
Right. That's, in terms of language, it's also very, very different, because it's so figurative, representative, and also spectacular in a way. So I'm curious to see, you're kind of shifting from a very transcendent, almost immaterial kind of fixture of certain, floating moments, certain, fugitive kind of feeling, to a affirmative gesture about this connection. You might call it, as you said, the genealogy of this connection, this artistic, whatever, family connection. So how do you decide to conclude the exhibition or the project in such a affirmative way?
Interesting. I wasn't consciously doing it that way, but I'm very interested.
Well, it's my interpretation. Reading your text, it comes to, maybe it's a wrong order. I read it.
No. It's a very intriguing perspective of it, and now that you present it, I want to think about it this way. The way I thought of it, it was very intuitive. It was because I realized there are 2 floors in the building. Most of the work that I by that time had done was upstairs, and I realized that eventually they also gave me the downstairs. right? And the downstairs is basically the main space downstairs is what they call the accordion room, which is the front of the building. And I realized that accordion room was directly underneath the camera obscura and the other room, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I realized the ceiling is the continuation of the upper rooms. So for me, it's very natural to present the root piece from the ceiling, because formally it just grows down from the second floor. It kind of protrudes into the space from upstairs to the first floor. So that's how I intuitively came to that piece. Now, how do I include that piece into the whole show, and to the extent that it encapsulates the thing? Really, it was the meaning that I conferred to it, because I encountered that phenomenon of tree root that has such a robust, intricate kind of image and organism to it. It really was very shocking for me to encounter in real life. And I knew there was something in there. And also, it's when I saw how the roots, one of the big shoots of the roots was hanging so low, I walked down there, and eventually it turned out to be not a root. It's actually one branch that bends so low that it looked like a root to me at the point. So that really gave me the entry point to make that into a piece, because it is consistent, for me at least, with how I think of the rest of the works there, which is how we perceive things. Most of the time, I myself realize that my perception of things, to a large extent, is conditioned by my learning, by my social conditioning, and all of those things. Without questioning it, we assume a tree is in such a way. There is a root, there is a trunk, there are branches, and so on. They have a certain relationship, different components. We don't question it until in real life I was presented with this conundrum. It's like, how does that work? A tree has the green leaves at the tip of the tree is actually much lower than the bottom of the root ball. So that itself is almost humbling to witness. And therefore I use almost, so you're right, this one is conceptually and intentionally use that encounter to speak to something, which is how we perceive things. So that's how I kind of fit them into this whole show together. And actually, now that you asked this question, now I became very conscious that after I had that piece and I realized the accordion room is rather long, and it has two parts. It's really strange, this house. The same room has two parts. The space is contiguous, but one part of it is wider than the other part. So naturally, I positioned this the root piece in the wider part of it. And then I was just thinking, so do I leave the rest of the room just empty? So very naturally, the second piece came because I presented the larger piece in the photograph in the larger part of it. Because the second part was so much narrower, when I walked there, there is a weird bodily sensation of almost claustrophobic feeling. I intensely felt the presence of the left side, which is the door and cabinet. There's a lot going on, but on the other side, there's nothing. It's just a white wall, right? So that gave me the intrigue that maybe I could use that spatial situation to speak the same thing as I'm trying to speak with the photograph piece, which is really the bodily sensation, bodily experience with the space. So because of that, I started to very naturally think, what if I do a mirror image on the other side? All of a sudden, then when we walk through it, we have to negotiate. It's like, what is representation? What is actual existence? The photograph that I put on the wall, it is by definition a representation of the other wall, but it is so large, it has a physical presence to it. It is, I think it is quite dismissive to think of it as just a representation, because it affects our body in the same way as the actual cabinet and door and so on. You know, so those are the things that I really was intrigued to play with for this show, at least. You know, so I felt downstairs in this way makes sense as a component of the large show. So.
Maybe a last question. How do you think your project makes sense in the current situation? Because apparently there's a dialogue with a very long Californian obsession. On the one hand, with this history of Californian conceptualism. On the other hand, also this potentially the Californian conceptualism is somehow different from maybe other groups of artists. It's very closely related to this atmosphere of West Coast Asian, especially this idea of Zen Buddhist kind of influenced, or somehow directly or indirectly, whatever, in the lifestyle, right? Much more closer to nature, much more also spiritual in a way.
Yes.
So this, of course, it's still present, but it's quite historical. And when the States, the world, and also in particularly maybe in San Francisco, the social reality becomes much more hysteric at this moment. On the one hand, you have, of course, the how to say, the turmoil of the conflict between different communities, especially the old inhabitants and the newcomers, the hipsters and the homeless, and so on and so forth. And we all know that. And now we are also in this kind of racial, gender, post-COVID kind of mess. And how do you see your project, this special project, which is also quite different from what most of the previous project you did that happened in, for example, galleries or museums, and as a very short, temporary, performative actions. And this time it's a kind of long, lasting residency, living daily with, this context, and so on. And how do you see, this particular project can make a special sense? I know that there might not be your ambition to deal with this kind of questions, but somehow, how you situate yourself being an artist of your style or your type, let's say.
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually have thought about these things because I have seen and observed, quite involved in the contemporary art dialogues and everything. Given the time that we live in right now, which is, in your words, chaotic and filled with conflicts of all kinds, and some of them are really so in your face that one cannot avoid it. I personally has experienced having on the receiving end of this kind of very aggressive behavior through the polarization of thinking and so on and so forth, even in the Bay Area. So I am living in that actual world. And I don't know if you could imagine it, but that the show that I'm presenting right now is actually my way of dealing with that, believe it or not. I have come to, obviously in actual life, I would have to deal with the same things as everybody else has to. You know, some of them are quite confrontational, and some of them more calm. Some of them are anywhere in between. And it is my own conscious conclusion that none of the others had actual long-term effect in terms of the solution. So, for example, when you have political polarization, I used to be honestly very, very politically involved. You know, the voting process, activism, and so on and so forth. But over time, I started to see the pros and cons of that way of activism. A lot of it, if we're not conscious, actually adds to the confrontation effect of the actual life, right? So, of course, politics being what it is, it has to have this confrontational aspect to it because you're taking a stance, right? So I value that and I respect that. And I have friends who make art in that way, and I really respect their work. While I have had that kind of observation, I really do believe that there is an alternative way of dealing with this very, very confrontational, chaotic, conflict-ridden actual society, which is to steadfastly go the opposite way by showing and living it as an example of a possible and plausible way of existence in contemporaneously with the other way. You show them your force. So, for example, I really do believe that my life is more grounded now that I've chosen consciously to live this way and make art this way than before. And the effect of me becoming this way, I really could observe that it has a calming effect in my immediate circumstance. Like people around me, they tend to be not as agitated because most everybody coming out of the election, coming out of the pandemic and so on and so forth, are very anxiety ridden. You know, it's very irritable these days. You know, just takes a little bit to blow up, right? But when they are in the presence of behavior such as this, then it has its less tendency to go to the trigger behavior. And for me, it is a very practical solution actually to the actual life problems. And I am very, very hopeful actually, because I have been taking on this kind of project and I have been introduced to people in this sector of life. So as an example, 3 years ago now, I was invited to do a residency and did a show in Victoria in British Columbia, Canada. And because that show was focused around the notion of being in the present and the Buddhist teachings influence on contemporary art and contemporary life and everything. So I was introduced to several people who is not necessarily in the arts, but it's the quote unquote experts in their field, including an actual Zen, practicing Zen monk, Japanese scholar, and he is Japanese himself. And through contact with these people, I really was very convinced that there are more than one way of dealing with the conflicts. And the way this old gentleman deals with the same conflict that we all handle, it was very eye-opening. As an example, in his 80s, he came to meet me on a bicycle, okay? And that itself is like immediately impressive. So I knew this person has got something, right? And as I was starting to talk, I realized that it is because he practiced those things that we all just read about, you know, Zen Buddhism and Zen Quan and what is the sound of one hand clapping and so on and so forth. This guy really lives that. He embodies that kind of a teaching. And the fact that he has lived to, by now, 80 something, it is a really live lesson right there. You know, it is possible. It is really possible. And he lives in a very, he's like, got a great sense of humor, at ease, relaxed about life. And I thought, wow, I've come to, you know, going toward that age myself. I really wish that I start to learn something from that, you know, and that's something really is being practiced by myself now, including this kind of work and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's how I really relate to it. It is really by choice. It's consciously doing that. And I do this kind of practices in real life. I do meditation, regular yoga practices. And when I first did it, it really was just out of curiosity, well, because my peers do it and so on. But now you cannot ask me not to do it because I know the actual effect on myself, you know? So that to me is really beautiful to actually have an opportunity to hopefully create a kind of stage to present that as a possibility, you know. And whenever I'm given a opportunity, I will present this view and this way of life, because I really believe it is a good antidote to what we're right now. So
very good. So life goes on.
Life goes on, as we say. A tree is a tree, a mountain is a mountain.
Maybe tomorrow you forget it.
Yeah, and then tomorrow I will start again. So that's the thing. It's not up to me.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty interesting. No, let's stop here.
Yes,
if you
yes.
add more, it becomes too redundant.
Yes, yes. It's the essence of it is already there, and I like that feeling. I like I really appreciate the angles through which you ask this question. Like some of them I wasn't conscious of until you mentioned it. It's like it's very interesting. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks
Good,
so much.
Michael.